What does reducing graffiti, reducing neighborhood crime, and dental cavities have in common? Let's find out. All right, guys, welcome back to the Dr. Vincent Buscemi Podcast. It's about 6:15 a.m. on January 18th. This is actually the fourth time I'm attempting to record this because I'm a perfectionist, which is another problem for my therapist, not for you. Okay, I want to connect how one city in California, what's the name of the city here? Paramount, California, how they reduced crime by reducing graffiti, and how we can connect that to you improving your oral health. Now, when I talk about graffiti, I talk about gang-related tagging, which is totally different than the graffiti that's like beautiful and artistic and brings communities together. This is a graffiti that signals to other gang members, there's gangs here, and signals to people who are not in gangs, there's gangs here. I think it's generally accepted that gangs are bad, and people not in gangs are good for a neighborhood, and people in gangs are bad for a neighborhood. Okay, so if you read right here, it is a commonly held theory in criminal justice that vandalism, broken windows, graffiti encourage further crime and disorder, where an environment that is visibly cared for sends signals that crime is not tolerated. So in 2009, Paramount, California, recorded an average of 15,000 graffiti incidents per year. And their thinking was, if we can get this graffiti down, we can reduce our crime. So between the years of 2015 and 2018, they did their best to reduce as much graffiti as possible. They had a 68% reduction in graffiti incidents. And by graffiti, again, I mean gang-related tagging incidents. And from there, you can read the stats here, they were able to significantly decrease the crime. So let me draw this picture here for you. When there's more graffiti, it drives out the families that are not in gangs and that actually contribute to society. When that happens, it attracts more gang members to enter the neighborhood. With the more gang members, there's more tagging or more graffiti. That graffiti, again, we read up here, signals to other gang members that there's gangs here, attracts more gangs. Those gangs commit more crimes, more graffiti, signals again to drive out the good people, drive in the bad people, more graffiti, and it's a vicious cycle. So I want you to think about that vicious cycle when it comes to your oral health or the oral microbiology. Now, it is generally accepted by most scientists, and I'm not a scientist, remember I'm just a dentist, that dental caries is a dietary microbiology disease. What does this mean? That there's two factors in dental disease. It's the diet, what you eat, what you put in your mouth, or basically what food you eat that feeds the bacteria in your mouth. And the second fold is the bacteria. So, although this can happen, if you've had a completely sterile mouth, no bacteria, this is impossible, but if you had that, you wouldn't get dental cavities. Or if you had no diet, you wouldn't get cavities. If you didn't eat, you wouldn't get cavities, but you'd also die because humans can't get food from the sunlight plants can. So, read this right here. Therefore, dental caries is considered a dietary microbial disease that requires a cariogenic biofilm and regular exposure to fermentable carbohydrates, glucose, fructose, maltose, sucrose, all the O's from the diet. So, when you eat sugar, it changes the microbiology in your mouth, and that causes cavities. what this is actually called is called the ecological plaque hypothesis. You can read right here. The ecological plaque hypothesis believes that dental cavities is not caused by a specific type of microorganism, not just one, acting alone, but is the result of a shift in the microbiota of the dental biofilm towards a more carcinogenic species. When you go back to the graffiti and the gangs, when you have more graffiti, you have a decreased quality of the neighborhood, which produces, again, more graffiti, which produces more gang members and more crime. So the ecological plaque hypothesis states the same thing. When you have more graffiti in the gang-related analogy is fermentable carbohydrates in your cavity-related story. Now, there's a lot of people online, a lot of dentists, influencers that have more than 43 followers than I have that say sugar doesn't cause cavities, acid causes cavities. Maybe. But I think if you think about it that way, you're not thinking about this logically. I'm going to get real dorky for a second, but let's go to what's called first principles. Or another way of thinking, a lot of dentists talk about this way, or even doctors, root cause. So is acid the root cause of your dental cavities? No. Because the acid in your mouth, the low pH, has a root cause. And the root cause is fermentable carbohydrates. So I think it's not correct to say sugar doesn't cause cavities, acid causes cavities. I guess it's correct saying that, but it's not getting to the root cause, which will help you. Because all you hear is acid causes cavities in your mouth. Your next question would be, what causes the acid? And it's excess sugar or excess fermentable carbohydrates. So let's look at this chart from this study here. This is from, let's come all the way up here. Dental plaque as biofilm in a microbial community, implications for health and disease. Riveting. But this graphic here is very important to look at. So if you go back to the graffiti analogy, the more graffiti drives out the good people, drives in the bad people, they commit more crime, there's more graffiti, vicious cycle, vicious cycle, vicious cycle. Now, I want you to think about that in terms of the oral bacteria in your mouth. So, from the ecological perspective, when you eat glucose, fructose, sucrose, fermentable carbohydrates, the bacteria in your mouth eat that sugar, and the bacteria produces acid. That's the stress on the system. So remember, stress leads to disease. So look at this first thing here. Excess sugar, acid production. Then what happens is an environmental change happens where your healthy mouth, which used to be a neutral pH, see right here, goes over to a low pH, which is acid. And that acid then degrades your teeth. But it doesn't stop there. Not only does the acid produced by bacteria break your teeth down and cause cavities, it actually changes the actual microbiology of your mouth. And it makes it easier for the bad bacteria to thrive and harder for the good bacteria to thrive. So the more bad bacteria in there and the more acid they produce, it lowers the pH of the entire environment, selecting for making it easy for bad bacteria to thrive and survive. And as this bad bacteria survives and produces more acid, it kicks out even more good bacteria, brings in more bad bacteria, lowers the pH or increases the acid even more, and then leads to disease, which is dental cavities. So again, just like the graffiti is a vicious cycle in neighborhoods, this is also a vicious cycle. Sugar, bacteria produces acid. Acid reduces the pH in the environment. That reduced pH selects for bad bacteria, kicks out the good bacteria, reduces the pH even more, increases the acid more. That's the same thing. And then you get more cavities. And that's a concern. So I don't think it's honest when dentists online say sugar doesn't cause cavities, acid causes cavities. Because it's like a half-truth. There's a line between ignorance and fraud. I'm not saying these dentists are frauds, but there's a line between ignorance and fraud. And I don't know where to draw that line. And if somebody's trying to sell you something that reduces the acid in your mouth, which is it's going to be a good thing, without addressing the root cause, which is the fermentable carbohydrate, I think we have a concern. So then the question is, well, if I just not eat sugar, will I not get cavities? It's a good start. I want you to look at this next study I'm going to pull up here that talks about the effect of carbohydrate restriction on the presence of Streptococcus mutans. Basically, S. mutans, right here, which I'm highlighting, is one of the main bacteria that thrive in a low pH or high acidic environment and cause cavities. And in this study, they had a group of people, and it showed that a 3-week restriction of carbohydrates was able to change the microbiology in someone's mouth to a more healthy environment. So if we go back to this chart here, there was an ecological shift from bad bacteria to good bacteria in the mouth from only a 3-week restriction of fermentable carbohydrates. And the study further showed that as soon as that person went back to fermentable carbohydrates, the oral environment went right back to a bad environment and right back to a cavity-producing environment. Now, I'm not explicitly encouraging a ketogenic diet. I have pros and cons about a ketogenic diet, but I think an important thing to point out here is that these subjects in the study had to reduce fermentable carbohydrates for 3 full weeks, and they weren't having cheat days in those 3 weeks. Basically, they weren't removing graffiti a little bit and then allowing graffiti on Sundays and then going back to no graffiti on Monday. They had to completely restrict carbohydrate for 3 weeks to get a shift in the microbiology of their mouth. And then when they went back to the fermentable carbohydrate, their mouth went back to a less favorable situation for cavities. So it's something to really look at. I know this is beating a drum because dentists always talk about sugar caused cavities. But I think one of the missing pieces was I think some people just have a very low tolerance for fermentable carbohydrate when it comes to getting cavities. So if you're constantly getting cavities and you're frustrated with the dentist and you don't know where to start, I'm not saying this is the only thing you need to do, but a really good thing to look at would be restricting your fermentable carbohydrate for an extended period of time and seeing if that produces better oral health effects. I think that's the way to go. Now, what about like fruit with fiber? Or what about other types of fermentable carbohydrate? I would suggest in the beginning, you do a ketogenic diet, a whole food paleo ketogenic diet, nothing processed. And as you start to stabilize your oral microbiology, maybe slowly introduce other forms of fiber-full carbohydrates, whole food carbohydrates, fruit, vegetables. But I think the rest of your life you stay away from artificial food and sucrose and isolated glucose and isolated fructose and everything that wasn't originally produced in nature. And I think a good way to settle is all the carbohydrates that you eat should come from whole foods, not the store, an actual whole food. Nothing against the store Whole Foods. So I think this is a really good place to start. I know we talked about fluoride last time, and people said fluoride's a neurotoxin. Any form of topical fluoride will cause brain disease. I just don't know if that's true. And another leg of this, or arm of this, leg, arm, body, another aspect of fighting dental decay would be topical fluoride, and other parts too that we'll talk about. So, in conclusion, everything in your life, you have to get to the root cause. And one of the root causes of what actually causes dental disease is from the ecological plaque hypothesis, is this chart right here. And excess sugar or excess fermentable carbohydrate is the start. So I would start here and let's figure this out. I have a passion for my patients. I have a really big passion for my patients that are really dedicated to preventable care. And this is what this podcast is for. So thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys soon. Bye.